because here was an amazing invention that you had. But when you think about it, at the time that you created CNN, there was the CBS television network with news bureaus all over the world. There was ABC. There was NBC. And you didn't even have a newsroom. Could you describe what it was that led you to create this amazing enterprise?
Well, when I first decided that I was going to try and build a national network using cable television and satellites, and my first channel was the local station in Atlanta, which was WTBS. I always was thinking ahead, and I said, what would be another format for a channel? Because home box office was already there with new movies primarily, and we were carrying old movies and sports on the superstation, and I thought about the creation of an all-sports network, which ESPN did, and I thought that was going to have a long payback because the rights for sporting events were so expensive that I didn't see how it could be amortized in a reasonable period of time. But when I thought about the news format, it occurred to me that would not cost so much because you didn't have rights that you had to deal with. You could hire your own news people and start a news network relatively inexpensively. And I just, I'd been in the radio business before I got in the television business for a few years, and I studied it too, and I knew that the radio stations, the all-news radio stations in New York and in Washington, in the very large markets, all-news radio hadn't penetrated the smaller markets yet, but were successful. And I just figured, that television, all-news television would work. But I didn't, at the time, and this was in the early 70s, at the time, or the middle 70s, I should say, at the time I thought one of the networks would do it, because they had, as you say, they had the bureaus, they had the infrastructure, they had anchors, but their expenses, they also had outrageously high expenses. They were, like General Motors is today, they were spending about $300 million a year on news to do 2.5 hours of news a day. And I started totally differently. I said, how much can we spend? And I set up a budget of $30 million a year, which was 1/10 as much as their budgets, to do 10 times as much news, 24 hours a day. And we did make that work. We started with a budget of about $30 million a year. And they looked at the costs, the incremental cost of doing it, and it was just too great for them. Also, they stuck their heads in the sand the same way the American automobile industry has done, and tried to pretend that cable was going to go away.
Well, part of it's just...
And I wasn't going to let that happen.
Well, you certainly didn't. And, as I told you before, reading this book is a little bit for people of my era, of an era before mine even, like Perils of Pauline or Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's one adventure after another. You take these things on, and you're at the edge of a cliff, and you're about to fall over the cliff, and somehow you make it work.
That's why I put it down in the book, because it's almost unbelievable, right?
Right.
It's not a business book, it's an adventure story. And one of my favorite sayings is that life is an adventure. And whenever I face difficult times, whatever they are, I say, this is an adventure. And this terrible economic crisis that we're going into now, I'm looking at it as an adventure. I'm going to come out of it somehow. I'm going to live through it. I said I didn't get to live through the last Great Depression. I heard about it. I didn't really want to. But since we're stuck with one, maybe, might as well make the most of it. I mean, because what are you going to do? It could last 10 years. That's how long the last Great Depression did. And if it does, well, tough, The tough will live through it. You got to be like Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Remember when she was eating the radishes? When she got home and when she stood up on the hill and looked at Tara, and she held her hand up with that radish in it, and she said, as God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. And that's the attitude you've got to have. Winners never quit, and quitters never win. And I'm going to look at it as an adventure, and by God, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not going to be miserable the last 10 years of my life.
And I guess that's kind of an invitation.
If you can't afford to have a car anymore and drive across town, knock on the door of your neighbors. You never did that. And say, how would you like to play bridge tonight? What's so wrong with that? In the 50s, that's the way it was. I remember when